Okay. I got the great job of filling in for Joe Wilson. He can only go up from my efforts. On top of that, I lost my voice Monday night, so that's why I sound like a frog. That would have been a good excuse to get out of this if I'd have called somebody yesterday. What was I thinking? I also tried to, okay, it scared me because I see something there. That's not mine. I tried to put together like a timeline. We used to draw it in the middle school class of the Old Testament, the whole history of the world, and I was going to show you that, and I am no computer artist, so that struck out too. So we'll get through this tonight. I don't have a whole lot of notes. I just want to talk to you about, in general, an introduction to Exodus. I suppose I should start there. This quarter, Joe Wilson is going to be teaching about the Exodus. That is the same book that all of the students, 3rd grade through 12th grade, are studying this quarter. It is the Bible Bowl book for lads leaders. There's about 20 chapters in Exodus, and they're going to, of course, get a very in-depth study, and we like to spend at least one quarter in the auditorium talking about the same book. Of course, adults don't do the same level of detail that children do because we like ideas and they can latch on to facts, so it's a different story. Joe is in Europe, so he's not here. He asked me to fill in, or I guess a volunteer asked, I don't know which one it was, to fill in for him tonight. And we're not going to cover, we're going to cover in general, but we're not going to get into the text very much, other than to see where does this book fit in to the overall scheme of God's redemption of man, and what does it mean in general, where does it fit, and then we'll get an overview of what happened in Exodus. So, like I said, first, we did the whole Old Testament in the middle school class 2 years ago. 14 months ago we finished it. And we drew an outline every other class period on the page. And so we'll just do it kind of pretending here. See if I can get. This side will be the beginning. I'll just line it up here on the edge of the pew. This side will be the end, or maybe we can stretch it out. We're over here. Does that make sense? Like the beginning to where we are, which is not the end yet, but that's as far as we know. And so, what are the two big events, first two events you would put on this timeline that separate God's plans for his people? What's the first one? All right, well, I wasn't thinking about that, but yes, that's the beginning. But I think the law of God was the same before and after the flood. So when did the law of God first change in the way he communicated with his people? The 10 Commandments, that's right, Mount Ararat. We go right here a third of the way down and draw a big mountain. Mount Ararat, 10 Commandments. Sinai. Sorry. Yes, I'm stuck on the flood. See what you did to me, Mr. Burr? Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai. Plus, I'm doing this backwards, so this. I'm having to think about every motion I make. So Mount Sinai is the big mountain right here, okay? And then what's the next thing? The cross. That's right. More than my grandmother and Mr. Burr are allowed to participate. I would appreciate participation. The next thing is the cross, Jesus. That's right. And so we fall past that. And then in between the cross and Mount Sinai is the old law. And before Mount Sinai, what is that? Patriarchal age. Patriarchal age. I don't know. I say it wrong every time. Too many syllables in there. My tongue doesn't work that fast. So where does the Exodus fall in this continuum, the events of Exodus? Where do they start or end or continue and take on? beginning in the patriarchal age and document the transition, God's relationship with his people from patriarchal to the Mosaical law, the old law, the Old Testament. That makes sense? That kind of where we're talking about is right here at Mount Sinai. That's where this book begins before and runs through. So, let's talk about what happened before this. And some of you know this, and a lot of you know it, and it may not be immediately recallable because you have to kind of think about where things are. And some of you don't know this and can't think about these things, and that's okay. The whole point to cover is to get us all refresher as to where we are and how these things fall. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you. I'm getting some good positive feedback. Okay, so Adam is at the beginning, at creation, right? Then the next big event is the flood, the Tower of Babel. And so where does Moses Noah, I don't have any, I thought that I knew this stuff well enough, thought about it, but I don't have any notes. Noah is the flood, right? That's, I don't remember the exact year, but 1,300 years after Adam, or more, 1,500, I don't know. Let's do it this way. Garden of Eden, the fall, the descendants of Cain and Seth, all the way down to Noah. We have the flood. After the flood, we have several generations that lead to Abraham. Okay? We still get another dispersion of people and growing exponentially. We saw a YouTube video about that, how fast populations can grow if they're prolific, and it is absolutely possible and probable for the numbers of people to grow that fast. I mean, I just think about 2 or 3 generations when everyone's having 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 children, how quickly things grow. So, okay. 2 people turn into 100. All right, now we got a better timeline. Okay. That's different than the information that I had. That's good. God calls Abraham. Who are the 3 fathers of the Jews? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the 3 wandering Jews, right? That's the little kids song we sing at VBS. What's the word, 3 wandering Jews? We almost had a chorus starting here. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac was the father of 2? Jacob and Esau. That's right. Okay. Who got the blessing? Jacob. That's right. Through very honest means. Not so much. Okay. Jacob's wives were Leah and Rachel. That's Leah and Rachel. Rebecca was whose wife? Isaac's wife. That's right. All right. All right. So, all those names, keep them straight. Jacob's name was changed by God to Israel. And Jacob had how many children? 12 sons. That's a trick question. 12 sons. How many children total? 13. What was his daughter's name? Dinah. That's right. Okay. Who can name the 12 sons of Jacob? Huh? Who thinks they can? Who wants to? No, we're not going to gamble here in Bible class. Let's see if I can remember them. I think I know them. My children say these, so they sing the song. First one is Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. Did I get 13? No, I miscounted. I think I said Joseph. Joseph and Benjamin. Joseph's number 11. Benjamin's number 12. Who was the favorite? Joseph. He got a what from his father? A gift. A coat of many colors. That's right. And so all this is, I don't know. I hope this isn't too boring. We're going to go right down through this and talk about where we are in the history, what you read about in the Bible. Okay? All right. So how did Joseph get to Egypt? He was sold into slavery by whom? Do anybody remember which two were the ringleaders? Or which one commented against selling him into slavery? That's okay, I don't remember. Huh? Reuben was going back to get him? That's right. Okay, that sounds right. What's that? They threw him in a pit. When the slave traders came by, they sold him. They wanted to get rid of that favorite brother. That was all stirred up by two things. What two things? In general, what? Jealousy, because his father loved him best, and also because he had a couple dreams. The dreams showed what? What were his dreams that he had? That all his brothers would be bowing down to him. Those two things coupled together made him not long for his father's household. Okay, and I'll make this point with you. This is the method by which God saved the seed line of Jesus, right, from famine. Famine later in the land of wherever they were, over there in the land of what became the land of Canaan, I believe. That's the way God saved the seed line of Jesus. Was it sinful for those brothers to sell him into slavery? Yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And yet God used that for his purposes, right? So just because he uses something doesn't mean that was endorsed by him or what he wanted to happen, but he can use those things just the same. That's my side note. That's why I stood over here on the side. Okay. All right. So Joseph goes to Egypt. What happens to him there? First, he's a servant in Potiphar's household, and he rises to be very trustworthy. He's obviously a talented individual who God blesses his efforts. And that goes to the benefit of Potiphar. And then what happens? He gets a frame up, right? He gets a frame up. He flees Potiphar's wife in adultery. She lies about it, has him thrown in prison. And he's wasting away in the prison for a good long while. Doesn't tell us how long, I don't believe, but a good while. And then, how does he get out? Whose dreams? The whose? The baker's dreams? But then that led to Pharaoh, right? The baker got out and got back in Pharaoh's house. And then when he had a dream that couldn't be interpreted, he told him in Joseph, and he interprets the dream. He goes right from the prison to Pharaoh's house and rises up and continues to do well. And the Lord blesses him there so that he rises to what rank in Egypt? Second in command. That's right. Second in command. And as he gets that second in command, what does Pharaoh have him oversee? Let me back up. What were the dreams that he interpreted for Pharaoh? Say it again. 7 years of plenty, then 7 years of famine. Who knows what Pharaoh had him oversee then about that, directly related to that dream? What did he do? They stored a certain percentage of grain for all those 7 years. And they go back and find those granaries made of clay and all those kind of things where they had that grain safe and stored, where moisture and vermin and all those things couldn't get to it, right, to keep it safe. So they saved it all those years, and then the famine came. And then what happened? What did Joseph oversee then? Not the distribution. The sale of that grain back to the people. I know this is one of my hobbies, so. I'm looking that up. The government taxes people, then sells them their own grain back. Such that by the end of the 7 years, people were selling themselves into slavery just so they'd have something to eat. Just so they'd have something to eat. And then as part of that, as that's going on, what happens? The famine is also where? Back where his father and brothers are. Back where Israel and the other brothers are and their families. And so we get this really interesting scene where a couple brothers are sent to Egypt to trade for grain. They had to trade for it. It wasn't given to them. They had to trade for it. And Joseph has the interaction with them. They don't know who he is, and he sends them back, brings them back Benjamin, and then he has the servants smuggle a cup and accuse him of stealing it and bring him back. And then he finally reveals who he is, and he threw him in the dungeon, right? No, of course not. He's happy to see them. He's happy to know how well they're doing. And ultimately, he brings his father and all his brothers in his father's household to Egypt. And they get set up in the best land of Egypt, or some of the best farmland of Egypt. And they're put there all because, so they go from where they would have starved to death probably, or close to it, to because Joseph was sold into slavery, God blessed him. And all these, the providence of God and the plan of God comes together so that his people are not only there, but they're thriving. Right? Thriving, given the best place because of Joseph's service to the Pharaoh. Okay. Now we get into where Exodus chapter 1 picks up, which is they're there, 70 people, taken care of, given land, thriving. And then, so there was 20 chapters in Exodus, there's 40. That was close enough, wasn't it?
Well, 20 is where the Ten Commandments are.
That's what I remembered, yeah. Exodus 20. All right, verse 8. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. Okay. Time has passed, and they've grown from 70 to how many? How many do we have at the time of Moses? What was it, say 400,000 men? Got that in my mind? There's a million people or so. So from 70 to a million. That can happen, but it takes several generations to make that happen. And they obviously are looked at as separate from the Egyptians. That's why they're a separate people, even though they're right there in Egypt, but they're an identifiable separate people. Then we get the Mosaical age is leading up here because we have the birth of Moses. How did Moses survive? Little baby in the basket floating in the water, right? Pharaoh's daughter picks him up, raises him. Eventually Moses is about 40 years old. He attacks an Egyptian and kills him. The word gets out and he flees. He spends 40 years in the land of Midian. And then he comes back. This is all in Exodus. Then he comes back at God's command and insistence to save his people from Egyptian bondage. And one of the interesting things, it's all these tidbits here, but the people did not know God very well, to hardly at all, when they were in Egypt. They had lost that, especially as they were in bondage. They knew they were Jews. They knew that their God was the Lord, but, it was all patriarchal, so there wasn't the Ten Commandments. There wasn't a written down law. And that whole process degraded their ability in the people as a whole's faith. You can kind of see that. Here's how they behave pretty soon. So what does Moses do? How does Moses and God, how does God, through Moses, get them out of Egypt? 10 plagues. Burning bush is how he calls Moses. Then they go to Egypt, and he's got the 10 plagues inflicted on the Egyptians, and they come. Then Pharaoh finally lets them go, pursues after them, and what happens? How do they get away? The Red Sea parts, they cross on dry land, and then it comes back together and wipes out the Egyptian army. Right? I don't know where that is. We're still in the first 10. Before chapter 20. They do that. They go to Mount Sinai. God gives them the 10 Commandments. They worship the golden calf while he's up there. I'm trying to mention all the big stories that we try to teach, so we put them right in the right spot. 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai. They worship the golden calf. They killed the people who do that, except for Aaron who built it, I guess. But they killed 3,000 men or so, I think that's the number, who worshiped the calf or were a part of that. And then they set about going to the promised land of Canaan, traveling there. Who is Moses' helper during this time? Is it Caleb too? I was thinking just Joshua. Caleb too. Caleb and Joshua. They get to Canaan, they go in as spies. 2 are faithful, 10 are not. The people don't want to go in there because don't have faith that God will deliver them. How do you walk on dry land where there used to be a sea and not think that God can take care of anything that comes your way? Right? We all have problems with faith too, I guess, but we just judge them too harshly maybe. That's right.
Didn't follow the law.
Probably maybe mean the majority or a big portion, though. Yeah, very few. So then they wander in the wilderness for 40 years. Then Joshua's the leader. Is Moses allowed to go into the land of Canaan? No, because of some of his behavior not following God's instructions. Joshua leads them to the land of Canaan, and they generally follow the Lord's command, but not 100%. They generally clear the Canaanites from the land, but not all the way, and that failure to obey plagues them the rest of their time until it overcomes them. Right? So, after... Yes. How did they eat while they were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years? First of all, they followed around a giant pillar of smoke in the day and a giant pillar of fire at night, right? Always there above the tabernacle. That's a big part of the back half of Exodus, is creating the worship requirements in the tabernacle. And during this time, The rest of the Pentateuch is recorded by Moses. Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, all recorded by Moses during this time. They're in the wilderness. That's when those books were written. Then Joshua takes over. They conquer Canaan. I still didn't mention what Louise wanted me to mention, which was while they were in the wilderness, they ate manna and quail. Who knows what manna was? We don't know. We don't know. It's just manna. Manna means what? Manna, the translation is what is it? So they didn't even know. Yeah, whatever. Manna and quail. That's right. It was enough to sustain them for a generation. Right? All right. And why did God give them quail? He gave them his perfect food that's all they needed. It was called manna, which they didn't even understand what it was. And why did he then give them quail? Because they complained. That's right. They complained. Okay. Yeah. Quail are good. That's right. All right. Joshua conquers. Then there's the period of the judges. And then we have the period of the United Kingdom, not Britain. The United Kingdom of the Bible. Who are the three kings? First, Saul, Solomon. Saul, David, Solomon. All right, who was Solomon's mother? Bathsheba. Bathsheba. Not what you'd necessarily expect. Not the first child of Bathsheba, though. Then we have not the united, but the divided kingdom. That's right. Not united kingdom, but the divided kingdom. Divided north and south. Who was on the bottom? What two tribes were in the south kingdom? Judah and Simeon? Okay, Judah and Simeon. The rest, the other 10 were in the north. And they were called Israel, the kingdom of Israel. Who was taken away captive first? The northern kingdom left in captivity, not left voluntarily, were captured and hauled away by whom? Assyrians. The Assyrians, that's right, the Assyrian. Very brutal empire. Very brutal empire.
722 BC.
Thank you for the date. 722 BC. 722 BC. Then, what was the date that the southern kingdom was carried away by Babylon?
606, I think.
Sounds right. We got an ascent there. 606 BC. The first time. What was the second time? 70 years? Oh, no, 10 years later. 586, 596. 10 to 20 years later, another raid to pull almost all the rest of the people away. While they're in Babylon, what books do we have written? Who was the queen of Babylon that was a Jew? Esther. That's right. Did we just talk about that Wednesday night? A couple Wednesday nights ago? Huh? Yes, we did. That's right. Okay. So then eventually, through some laws in favor, large part because of Esther, also because of Ezra and Nehemiah, the Jews are sent back to Jerusalem to reestablish their homeland by the Medo-Persians, not the Babylonians, the Medo-Persians. That's when Daniel is there in the Babylonian Empire. It's a transition, hand on the wall. I won't try to say that. What's the last one? Upstream, yeah. Which means you've been weighed in the balance and found wanting, essentially. Yes, that's right. And the kingdom is taken from Nebuchadnezzar, given to the Medo-Persians. And then they are put back. The Jews go back to Jerusalem, reestablish the temple. They're, I guess you'd say, a client or subservient to Babylon, pay taxes to them, do what they say. And that gets us through basically the end of the New Testament, and you have about a 400-year gap between the end of the Old Testament, between the Old Testament and the New Testament. 400 years of silence. During that 400 years is when Greece and Alexander the Great conquers the known world, the Romans rise, right? All those things. The Romans take over that large empire, and then we have Jesus comes around 0. And the rest is history. No. And then we get to the New Testament. So we got about 6 minutes left. That time I planned that perfectly, didn't I? So anyway, we tried to hit everything that I could remember to get the whole timeline as to where we stood. I hope this wasn't too redundant for many people. What questions do you have about where some of these things fit in, or what Exodus is about? Because let's go back to Exodus. Remember, Mount Sinai is the cornerstone of this change from patriarchal law to Mosaical law. Mosaical law is what you read about from Exodus to the end of the Old Testament, all during that time period. That's when all those books, 37, 39 minus Genesis, maybe 38 total, are all written in that Mosaical time period. And it all begins right here at the reading of this. When you study Exodus, that's when it comes about. The major, I don't know. What questions or comments do you have? Anyone? Did I leave anything out or make any mistake? I left a lot of stuff out. So, thank you for your attention. I'm going to turn you loose early, like I wish all these speakers would do, instead of going 10 minutes late. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your participation. I appreciate it. Good night.